This is Think Tank, an audio-video collection of conversations with citizens of Trinidad and Tobago. I'm Daren Dhoray. Welcome to all of you in Trinidad and Tobago and around the world. Cybercrime is one of the most pressing global issues of our day. The increasing use of technology increases one's digital footprint, which invariably leads to increased possibilities for cybercrime. The Global Risks Report 2023 by the World Economic Forum identifies widespread cybercrime and cyber insecurity among the newest of the top 10 global risks. In terms of the monetary risk, the potential value is devastating, with an estimated US $10.5 trillion cost projected by Cybersecurity Ventures, the world's leading researcher for the global cyber economy. In the Caribbean, the impact of cybercrime carries an even more severe risk. Sympathy Consulting, a leading cybersecurity consulting agency in Jamaica, found that 42% of companies were vulnerable due to improper cybersecurity devices. We often use the term island vulnerability to describe the disproportionate effects of climate change on small islands. But what about the disproportionate effect of cybercrime in the Caribbean? Here's what I think. In Trinidad and Tobago, we seem to both underestimate the value of our personal data on the one hand, while taking for granted the disastrous consequences of data breaches on the other. In 2023, we experienced an unusual spike in ransomware attacks affecting various private and public entities. Unusual compared to previous years, but not uncommon when compared to breaches of cybersecurity worldwide. We don't approach cybersecurity with the urgency and seriousness that it so clearly deserves. A major intervention must be spearheaded by the present government, which, according to Attorney General Reginald Armour, must continue to actively work on increasing this criminalization of cyber attackers. With the slow movement to update cybercrime legislation, our cybersecurity response has to start at the organizational and individual levels. As I say in my column, a combination of public and private entities combined with individual responsibility is perhaps our best way to mitigate and ultimately prevent the wide-ranging effects of cyber attacks. We may be a small island, but that does not mean our data is insignificant. If anything, our data might be considered even more valuable because of our country's relative smallness and lack of our digital security compared to larger economies. Cybercrime will only continue to evolve and become more sophisticated. We simply cannot afford a stagnant cybercrime bill or be complacent about cybersecurity measures. Here with me today on Think Tank to discuss cybersecurity is IT professional and founder of Cybersecurity, a nonprofit organization, Daren Dhoray. Let's get started. So Daren, tell us about your cybersecurity, tell us about your company. Tell us about all the things that you're doing relative to cybersecurity and data protection.
Thanks, Gerald. I was really intrigued by that introduction. I think it's, quite pertinent given what we experienced over the last couple of days with, CrowdStrike. And I'm sure we'll probably get into more of that, during the podcast. Cybersecurity really is, something that was born out of my passion to help and give back. It started in 2010. Which was around the same time when the government of the day introduced the One Laptop Per Child program. And, some secondary schools who, would have received the laptop sort of noticed that, it didn't really come with the training that students would have, required to actually navigate the web in a safe and secure manner. Because lo and behold, and still same holds today, when you enter Form 1, that's probably the first time many students, and let's not assume that everyone has internet access. When you enter Form 1, it's probably the first time you have access to the internet. You're getting a high-end device, because most of them may have had a really poorly built tablet to try and do some sort of online learning. And internet would not have been as ubiquitous. You may have had sporadic use of internet, maybe from hotspotting off mom's phone. So it still happens today in 2023. And of course, consider 2010 to 2024, how much the environment would have changed in the online spaces. So I started off by doing, simple educational sessions. And this would have come from my background, being in IT and really, hovering in internet technologies ever since I graduated from UWI in 1999. I jumped straight into the Y2K bug, just coming out of university. And I don't know if you remember, we thought planes were going to fall to the sky, right? That didn't happen successfully. And, maybe with CrowdStrike, we thought some planes were going to fall to the sky. But nonetheless, I've been involved in IT and I understand that it is a technology that the internet's all right, and it is a technology that is never going to go away. It's going to become more pervasive, and we often throw our youngest ones into the deep end of the pool without any sort of formal training, and that's really what cybersecurity does. We've had the privilege of speaking to tens of thousands of students in Trinidad and Tobago. We've reached out to the region. I actually had the opportunity to do conversations with folks from Portugal and Spain, and that was really eye-opening, in terms of realizing that the world also sees the same problems that Trinidad and Tobago see. So, we were really, just sort of there. And I mean, dovetailing from that would have come not just speaking about cyberbullying and social media etiquette, but an area of research that I have, been doing a lot more into, and is that of internet addiction. Mm. And I'm sure both of us will probably raise our hands if we're saying, are we addicted to the internet? There's so many varying forms and fashions of internet addiction. And that's a whole different conversation. We could probably have an entirely separate podcast on that. I know you mentioned data privacy as well, and we'll probably dabble a little bit more, but I don't think, not just Trinidad and Tobago, but I don't think people in general who navigate the web really and truly understand or pay attention to what they share, the data that they own, and how valuable it really is. It might not be valuable in your eyes, but it's definitely valuable in many other individuals' eyes.
Yeah, you talk about yourself as a digital anthropologist, and that's fascinating because anthropology, my loose understanding of it, the observation of cultures. And so I want to talk to you about what you've observed particular to culture in Trinidad and Tobago and our culture of data, privacy, data breaches, but also just how we regard data. So talk to us about the CyberSafe digital transformation framework, the origin of it and the reception of it, given your digital anthropology.
Yeah, so that might be a self-coined term, but
I love it.
When you really look at it, it's really what I do. I don't just tell you about using the internet. I do a lot of research. I had the privilege of actually working with the Telecommunications Authority of Trinidad and Tobago a few years ago, and we did a really, really in-depth survey of just over 3,000 participants, Trinidad and Tobago, and we were able to get data that really showcased how prevalent cyberbullying is in Trinidad and Tobago, how much people actually stay online, and what they actually use the internet for, and where they access the internet. So, as you know, anthropology is a study of humans and human culture. So digital anthropology, which is a field, a scientific field, it is how humans interact with their devices. I learned a lot from Professor Brown from University College of London. He has actually a couple of books. He actually has a book based on some use cases of individuals he followed in Trinidad and Tobago who were on Facebook, their relation and how their relationships were actually tarnished based on perceived infidelity on the social space. I mean, it's fascinating stuff, and we probably have something similar going on here today. And I would like to continue my studies in that area. So one of the things I've realized in my studies, and what I share with parents really is, listen, it's not really about the device, but it's about how we, approach using the device. It's never really about TikTok or Instagram, because tomorrow another app could come up. Right. So, you don't really target the app, you don't really target the device, but you target the behavior and how you approach it. And I mean, the word addiction is not used loosely. I mean, when you think about addiction, you think about substance abuse, right? Yeah. And you would not necessarily tell someone who might be an alcoholic, say, hey, stop drinking, and tomorrow they off it. No, it doesn't work like that, right? They need help. And it's the same way in which they kind of tell a child, hey, put on the computer, put on the device. They will not do it because, the apps are actually built to keep you interested and or addicted. So yeah, again, that's our that is really where my passion lies now in terms of coming up with different strategies to deal with those things. You mentioned the digital transformation framework, and that really started during the COVID sort of pandemic era, where a lot of companies, if not everyone, was really forced to get online. And I mean, that probably was the start of all of the problems that we're facing today, right? But the cybersecurity digital transformation framework really came about as a tool to help small micro enterprises to move from their traditional / paper-based way of doing things into a digital way of, or digitally transforming them, basically, right? And it covers 4 different areas, and included things like collaboration, so communication, because sometimes we tend to forget all the different aspects. You might think, okay, well, fine, I want to digitally transform my business, and all I'm going to do is put the stuff on some software on your computer, and your back-end processes remain the same. So that's what I kind of help them do, is like eliminate the manual back-end processes. And we've had some pretty good uptake on it. Organizations would look at the framework, they would look at the steps. Sometimes they may contact me. I actually receive a couple of testimonials saying, hey, we didn't think about this as part of our digital transformation strategy. Now, of course, you could pay a company, a healthy sum of money to help them transform you. But this was really done to help the small business, who, one, needed to get online, and two, really didn't have either the knowledge and the wherewithal as to all of the things that they need to cover. So something as simple as backup procedures and how we could operate in an offline way, which we saw, play out when CrowdStrike shut down basically the majority of the airlines. Not all of those airlines were able to operate, but there were a few. I had actually posted up something on my LinkedIn where an airline in India did a handwritten boarding pass. The last time I saw that was probably in the early 90s, when that was the norm, right? So they clearly kept part of their, early day processing in the event of a situation like this. So that's what the digital transformation framework is really about, is how to get you onto the digital platform in a safe and secure way so that you can continue communicating with your customers. But also, and this is where the cyber safety element came into it, having your backup procedures in place, having your business continuity procedures in place, so that we can't say we're migrating over to the the cloud or the digital space and be completely at a loss if we lose internet or if we don't have power. You want to keep your business operating, so it's a give and take.
Where does education fit into this? Because you mentioned the apps would change, but the issue would remain the same. So in terms of speaking to people who underestimate the value of the data, like a simple thing like reusing the same password across multiple platforms, which I myself am guilty for. But how do you build an education into that framework and teach people about the value of their data?
So I think you hit the nail on the head, because cyber safety awareness is often the part of the puzzle that is left out. So, you could have all the money in the world available in your budget to, have the latest firewalls, the latest software, the latest everything. But if you don't educate your employees to do things properly, such as exactly what you said, and there's so many examples of it, using a weak password, you have essentially, eliminated or bypassed the millions of dollars that you would have spent. Case in point, there was a reported hack on the Disney group of companies, and this came about just about 7 to 10 days ago. And earlier this week, I read an article where the hacktivist group said, hey, we've just dumped all the data we found. Now, it's not customer information, but it's proprietary information to Disney, which we know could be quite valuable, right? It may have had images and mock-ups of new movies that they're coming out with for all we know. But the hacktivist group said, our guy inside, got cold feet and he left. So Disney probably has the latest and greatest and best cybersecurity protocols and software, but they probably did nothing to deal with the disgruntled employee, right? Or they didn't really, address the whole issue of cybersecurity awareness at the employee level as much as they should. And we're talking about a multi-billion-dollar company as Disney, much less a smaller micro enterprise or even a large enterprise in Trinidad and Tobago, who again would utilize the monies that they have to invest in hardware and software and so on, and not really look at the human resource behind it. Now, it's interesting that the government of Trinidad and Tobago introduced a cybersecurity investment tax allowance of up to $500,000. And this is significant, particularly for, again, the size of businesses that we have in Trinidad and Tobago. Now, on cybersafety.com, I would have actually written an article which was published in the press, and it did get some really good feedback as to how you can actually break down that 500,000 TT dollars into valuable spend for you, which included cybersecurity awareness training. And a few bodies said, hey, we didn't really think that we needed to put that as part of our strategy. And that's not a one-time thing. Whereas you could purchase the best antivirus software once and it'll just work for you forever, you need to continue updating your employees, because today it might be one kind of phishing attack, and then tomorrow it might be, AI doing something with, a face that looks like Jarrell and it's speaking something, but it's not you, right? So, you always have to be on top of the game as it pertains to, managing and mitigating. So I think that's a gap that cybersafety fills, right, in terms of cybersecurity awareness. And it really has to start from, the lowest levels. So we go into primary schools and speak to standard 3 students, about being safe on the internet. And there are many advantages to that. But then, you go up to the tertiary level students and you have a different kind of conversation with them, right? And then when you speak to corporate entities, it's a whole different thing, because now you want to speak to the C-suite and tell them, hey, you guys are actually being targeted. And he was like, how you mean? It's like, you will probably get an email that seems to be so custom and curated for you as the CEO of the company that you feel it's a legitimate email, because the hackers have become so sophisticated. Jaron, I've seen emails that could even trick myself if I don't really give it, a second look. Yeah. They use logos, they use terminology, they use phrases that it's internal speak. So you wonder, wow, is there an inside person? And what some of the sources have found is that an email address of maybe an admin assistant who might have access to the CEO's account was compromised because he or she used a very weak password. So I could have punched into that, and all I'm doing literally is just sitting and reading emails. And they may do that, they take the long game, right? They may do that for 3 to 4 months, until they understand the operations and they realize, you know what? On the third Thursday of every month, there's a transfer that goes to this bank. And this is the type of money that going. Let's create a phishing email with a fake account and see if it works. Yeah. Sometimes.
Now, near the end of 2023, and for that whole year, really, it struck me as unusual that we saw these rise of ransomware attacks. I suppose on a telecommunications company, TSTT, was perhaps the most notable one. In terms of, yes, we can boil this down to an increased remote work policy, but what other reasons you attribute to these rise in ransomware attacks, and how can we prevent similar attacks going forward with increasing sophistication of surveillance?
Right. So, I mean, I don't mind. I hope you don't mind if I correct you a little bit.
Of course.
I don't think there's a rise in 2023. I think that there was more of an increase in the requirement to report. So what you would have had happening is more companies would have been forced to report breaches that have been happening. Therefore, to the public at large, it seems as if there was an increase in attacks in 2023. But since maybe 2017, 2016, with WannaCry ransomware, which became one of the more popular ones, there have been persistent types of attacks and increases in attacks on a annual basis, but different types of attacks. So ransomware was not too big before, but it became proliferate when the hackers realized, hey, people actually want to pay us Bitcoin to get back their stuff. So I am not saying that there has not been an increase, but what I'm saying is that from the public's perception of it, the requirement to report a breach might have been a bit more enforced. So you would find more of the larger corporations having to report breaches. So, that's where I wanted to just sort of clear the air on it, because it's not to say that 2023 was a bad year or a good year for the hackers, right? So you do have that, and it's really good. It's good to report, because we tend to have a habit of sweeping things under the rug and keeping it quiet and just trying to fix it and just move along to the next one. But if the public at large, and when I say public at large, other big businesses in the industry and small as well, isn't aware that someone or an entity as big as TSTT could be compromised, then they will definitely look and say, well, wow, if TSCT becomes compromised, I better need to look at myself. If we weren't aware of that information at all, then you would understand that they may not have a need for urgency by other entities to get into cybersecurity awareness programs, upgrade your security, and dust off that proposal that the IT guy sent you a few years ago that you just ignored because that's not happening to us. That's the attitude we like to have, right? So I think that we have to be more mindful about what's going on. I have a phrase I like to share, folks. We are all hacked. We just don't know it yet. It might be someone sitting around on your network just waiting to pounce. So there is that.
Have you had any consultations with stakeholders from the government about how to develop the cybercrime bill? Because as you say, it could be better. The language could be a bit stronger, but not too strong as to be misinterpreted. So first of all, have you been consulted or as a digital anthropologist on the cybercrime bill in any capacity?
So not directly, but when the first version of the bill, the 2017 version of the bill, or I think it was the 2014 version of the bill came out, and it was open for comments. So we actually went through the bill with a fine-tooth comb and submitted comments. I would have actually, sat alongside some of the journalists, and they would have had their concerns on the journalist side, which we could mention here as well. But I focus, of course, in the areas of cyberbullying and social media etiquette and so on, offenses against persons and those type of things, reputational damage. The first version of the bill, I believe it was 2014, and there was a 2017 version of the bill that was revised. And the 2017 version, again, I commented on that because they actually removed the term cyberbullying from the bill, which to me was very, very blatant. It's much easier for you, for myself as someone who's speaking to the community and saying, hey, this bill references what a cyberbully is, and these are the fines, X, Y, and Z. But if it's not that, and again, it's subject to interpretation, then you have a whole host of different reasons as to why this person might not be cyberbullied when they indeed would be, right? And again, the whole issue of subjectivity and openness for interpretation is what many of the journalists would have been concerned with, because that seemed to have now infringed on not just their freedom of speech, but the ability to do work in the manner in which they used to do work before. We will get into that in a little bit. But with respect to the cyberbullying aspect of things, they removed the term cyberbullying, but they did include definitions in terms of reputational damage, offense against the person. Again, all of these are already in the Offenses Against the Persons Act. So one would almost think that they kind of just pulled some of the stuff from there into the cybercrime bill. I reviewed two other pieces of legislation, one from New Zealand and the United Kingdom. Interestingly enough, one of them actually, I can't remember which one, did not have the word cyberbullying in it. It could have possibly been the United Kingdom. But the other one, but at the same time, both of them had more direct reference. So there was less subjectivity when you had to look at the bill to determine whether or not this was a cyberbullying activity.
Yeah.
So the difference with what we are faced with now, it seems to be like there's just too much subjectivity, right? And almost so that what could be a valid comment or allowed phrase of speech can be interpreted. Lawyers could really twist the legislation a bit to say, hey, what you said there is actually cyberbullying. And I think that's where one of the concerns, and that also falls with respect to some of the issues that journalists would have raised, because it was not very specific in terms of this activity would require this sort of punishment or whatever the case might be, it was too subjective. So it sort of restricted a journalist from even something as simple as getting information from an informant, right? Or this whole whistleblower sort of concept that put the journalist at fault almost, if it came down to the defender, looking back at how this information was acquired and so on. So I am not too familiar as to what they would have used to develop the current cybercrime bill in terms of, I don't think it was something that they would have built from scratch. That didn't make any sense at all because, there are many different permutations of a cybercrime bill. So I think that, however, that it needs to tighten up. You need to be more specific. You can't sort of infringe on our online freedom of speech. And I'm not saying allow us to say any and anything. We've already seen instances where using the Offenses Against Persons Act, those who have committed, really bad reputational damage type of activity online have been, made to face, the brunt of the law, even down to the school level, cyberbullying and so on. We've seen students who have been reprimanded, some of them even expelled, again, based on Child Protection Act and, the other laws that we have to govern against, that group of individuals. So the cybercrime bill is needed because we can't continue to get away with some of the things that are said and mentioned on the internet, but at the same time, you wouldn't want to end up in a situation where you kind of live in this sort of controlled state where you can't express yourselves freely, on the web, which I mean to a certain extent that's really what it was meant for in the first place.
So if one of the reasons, let's say it's lack of specificity, Daren, why isn't this happening? Why aren't we making changes as necessary? What is happening? Why is it so slow to progress towards an updated cybercrime bill?
I would say it as it is. I believe that even those in power are afraid that, the things that they have the privilege of saying and doing right now would probably impact them if that law does come into play. We have this thing called parliamentary privilege, which sometimes leaks all the way out into the public for. And even, as, high-level businessmen as well, they tend to get away with certain things because we don't really have the legislation to deal with it. And this speaks directly to some of those things. So the specificity of it would probably not just benefit the public at large, but it might impact on some of the, let's just say, privileges that those who currently enjoy that will no longer be free to enjoy. So I believe that's one of the reasons why. You also have to consider as well whether or not we are leading towards a controlled state. So you will probably not want to have a cybercrime bill that is as specific and just deals with the matter. You want to have some level of flexibility and say, if I don't like Jarrell as a journalist and he said something, I could use this against him. It's probably wrong to say, but when you look at the length of time that has passed, it's 7 years since the last revision of a very simple bill. Let's not beat around. This is not something difficult to figure out. You have to then look at reasons that not logical as to why it is we have not yet passed the bill. And interestingly enough, that really would propel us, I should say, in terms of being able to do online activities a little bit more freely and safely and maybe pushing online commerce in a bigger sense. And again, they may have far-reaching repercussions as to maybe why our current environment may not necessarily want us to go the route of online commerce, right? And prefer to keep the commerce, manual as it is. So it might have tentacles that feed into all different areas. I genuinely don't think that there is a critical reason as to why we can't pass it. I just feel, there is either not the will or there are other reasons which might impact those who have to actually sign off on the bill from doing so.
What is the most urgent thing, the most pressing thing that we as individuals, as citizens, can do to at least mitigate, if not prevent entirely, data breaches and attacks on our privacy?
You really have to not take any and everything as face value. I mean, as we usually would face, just look at all of the different reports that you've had regarding Facebook Marketplace. And folks looking to buy a car, sell a car, whatever it might be, whatever the product is, and they end up being robbed. The car that they went to sell gets stolen and so on. So criminals, have been using the online spaces to propel their activities. And this could be something as straight up as Facebook Marketplace, but it could also be something as, hidden as a phishing email, which has become much more sophisticated. No longer you have those phishing emails with bad grammar. I obviously used to say bad grammar often as spammer. It's become a lot more, pertinent now. They use probably AI tools that would help, generate something that might have a little Trini or Jamaican slang in it, depending on your audience, and it will become and seem so pertinent. So you definitely have, those things to look at. So you have to be on your P's and Q's. I no longer really accept that, I don't understand tech. I don't want to get into it. To me, that is no longer acceptable, even from the youngest to the oldest. You have to understand, and this is where you are at right now. So don't be afraid of the technology. You have to look to embrace it. But again, just be very mindful that, what you see might not necessarily be the real thing, especially with AI and video generation and so on. I've had many of my aunts and uncles send me, videos. Is this real? Is this real? And it's good that they're identifying that it might not be real, because that shows that their awareness is building, right? So, you might see something from President Trump, and clearly it's not President Trump saying those things, but, he is a very extremely high profile target. So you will find, voiceovers with his face, and the mouth is moving exactly like if, it's him. So those are things that we have to be, pretty mindful of. You have to kind of operate in the online space with safety in mind, the same way in which you kind of operate in the real world space, right? I'm not saying be paranoid, because some of us probably a little paranoid. But if you are doing things like online banking, I would say, yeah, be paranoid, because it's your personal finances that you are, getting involved in there. So, some of the things that we tend to do here is do online banking on free internet access. So you might go to a coffee shop and they have free internet and say, hey, let me just do my business. I'm logging in, actually typing in my passwords in these areas. And those are things that we should really avoid. You can probably browse social media in that space, but definitely not something that you want to do, outside in the public. So again, if you would not check your money in the public, well, why go and do our online banking transaction in the public, right? So the same kind of diligence that you're going to be using in your everyday lives, you want to use it in your online life. And yeah, I mean, keep connected to sites like Cybersecurity, because we share, the latest spam, the latest hack, the latest whatever it is that might be going on. You really have to be on your guard. Remember that you use your best judgment when you engage and interacting in the online space. And hopefully you might be able to navigate in a way that won't cause you severe hurt as you go along.
Yeah, use your best judgment. I like that. Daren, keep up the great work. CyberSafe TT. I have great respect for people who run nonprofit organizations, and this is a very important issue that will only get more sophisticated in this era of artificial intelligence and deep fakes. The best strategy you might have is to be more discerning and to be more aware. Daren, thank you again for being part of our think tank. And thank you to everyone watching and listening.